Good evening, and thank you for joining Triangle Association of Freelancers. My name is Maya Spikes, and I'm the Executive Director of Triangle Association of Freelancers, also known as TAF. And this evening, we are very happy to have for our monthly meeting Dr. Irma McLaurin, who is a longtime TAF member, as well as a great poet and author. And she is going to talk to us um, today about another great poet and author um, by the name of Azmera Hammouri. And Dr. McLaurin, I will go ahead and turn it over to you.
Okay, well, keep watching and see if that'll work. As I said, the video will make available after the meeting. But I asked Azmera Hammouri-Davis, who just got another last name because she just got married, for us to have a conversation. And that conversation was about what motivated us in terms of writing poetry, and in particular, how our identity shaped the poetry that we wrote. And Azmera is someone who is, her grandfather was Palestinian and a refugee. She has a degree in a divinity degree from Harvard. And so for her, spirituality is very much part of how she centers herself in her poetry. And she talks about how it is a place where she's able to think clearly when she's writing poetry, that it grounds her. And in fact, one of her poems that she reads, and we go back and forth with the reading, is called Grounded. And she was, I think, really interested in letting people know that she situates herself like in the natural world. She was actually raised in Hawaii. And so water and nature are very much part of her landscape, her poetic landscape, as well as her natural landscape. And as someone who is very much rooted in spiritual beliefs, and she says one of the things that has happened is that over time, as she started working around issues of diversity and difference, she initially thought about God as a he, but now she is sort of moving back and forth between, what is God, and how does God speak to different kinds of people. I think what's interesting about her work is that she's very much rooted in rhyming, which is what spoken word is about. And for those of you who've not heard hip hop or spoken word, rap, you've heard some versions of it, but there's a whole spectrum of what people do under the label of hip hop. My son has been doing consciousness hip hop, meaning that it is rooted in social commentary, social critique, truth telling, as people call it. And not everybody rhymes, but her work is very much rooted in rhyming. Mine, on the other hand, is very much free verse. I was very much influenced by people like Gwendolyn Brooks, William Carlos Williams, Langston Hughes. And there are times in which my creative nonfiction and my poetry overlap. When I go out to write an essay, an op-ed, I don't know if it's going to be prose or it's going to be poetic prose. It just depends on the topic. When Nikki Giovanni, Black poet from the 60s, passed away, what came out of that was, in fact, more of a poem. It was intended to be an essay. The same thing for Bell Hooks. And I do publish on Medium. And so that particular one is a good example of how my work starts out as an essay, but ends up being a poem. And this one is called Nikki Giovanni, Black Poetic Angel at Rest. When death comes to steal you away in the night, like some conductor on the Underground Railroad, do not mistake it for Sister Harriet. When death comes, banging on the tom-toms and playing Freedom Sweet as if Max Roach was in the house, twirling his drumsticks and pounding out syncopated rhythms. A boom, 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 shaka-laka-laka-laka, boom, 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 shaka-laka-laka, boom. Do not confuse death's orchestra with the ancestral tom-toms that once convinced some of our ancestors that they could fly. And when confronted with the prospect of eternal servitude to the white demons who kidnapped them and stowed them away on ships, they gathered up the chains that linked hundreds of Black cargo together, side by side in a hole, and slid into the sea feet first, before the links were broken. And those left behind swore in Yoruba, Swahili, and many more languages that the chained ones touched bottom, drowned, but later ascended to the sky as the people who could fly. Protected by Oshun to open the gateway between life and death and carry them back home to Africa once and forever. Nikki, time to rest. You gave us words of fire that always lifted us up with phoenix-like magic. You gave us imagery of our Blackness as a power that justified our communal ego tripping. You warned us in your poetry that was floetry decades before that word was invented. Like a Black Cassandra, you prophesied the dangers we would face routinely as Black people, breathing while Black, living while Black, walking while Black, driving while Black, thinking while Black, loving while Black, and for just being born Black. You shared with us your brilliance and resilience through the words of fire you wrote, spoke, gifted to us. We will miss you, Nikki Giovanni, Black poetic angel extraordinaire, who wrote to us and for us, gave us Black folk and the world a legacy of words that exuded courage, words of truth-telling, words of Black magic, words of inspiration, words of your life, words of your vision, words of love for us, your global Black community. Miss you? Without question. We will. Time to rest like Black poetic angel you are, for we know the next time it rains, we will be able to hear your floetry between the water droplets and feel your inspirational power manifested as thunder and lightning. Ashe. So that's an example of, I would say, my more contemporary poetry. I have 3 books of poetry. They're all out of print, so I have to decide what I'm going to do about that. Thank you. I see the hearts coming up. The first one was Black Chicago. That was published when I was 17. And the second one was a self-publication called Song in the Night. And the third one was my MFA thesis. I finished in 76, but the book did not come out until 88. But if you go back to the archives, I keep finding examples of, I've published in places like Obsidian, Nimrod. I'm in lots of anthologies, the historic ones, Black Sister, Double Stitch, Chomo Uri. There are a number of those that are classic. That was a collection of Black poetry, Black women's poetry in particular. And in my archive, I have a poster from Southern University. It was the first poetry reading that I did. They paid me $50 and flew me to Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And in that poster, I got this nice little afro and this young face. And I realized that I'm on the same poster with Audre Lorde and Lucille Clifton, among other people. And so I didn't realize, at that time that was the company I was in. And I was Googling something, and that same poster came up as the picture of an archive in, I think, Emory, about Black poetry. There's a Black poet whose work material they have, and they use that same poster. And so I'm looking, I wake up, I open it up, and there I am sitting on there. And I think we'll be hearing from someone like Azmera. She does, as I said, spoken word, but she's also a songwriter. She and her husband, they record. And her work is also very much rooted in social critique, I would say, but also affirmation, of the spirit. That is very important to her in that respect. And what I will do is, as soon as I finish this, I will upload immediately to YouTube. And the YouTube is just my name, Irma McLaurin. And so you'll be able to listen to the whole conversation. That one, I'll just put the whole one on so you can listen to it because it's about 55 minutes. I'd edit it down to 45, you know, but I think it might as well just post the full interview. And so I think one of the things I say to people is that I was born a poet and became an anthropologist. And that's because I really believe that the poetic sensibility is so central to my identity that it's hard for me to separate, even though I do other things. You know, I've been an academic administrator, you know, I'm an anthropologist, but my field notes when I first started doing anthropology actually came out in the form of poems. So it's very much rooted. And in my book, which is kind of rare for ethnography, there's a poem. And I was explaining to Azmera that when I was in Belize, I had brought my poetry book with me. And one of the people who also was a poet was saying, well, many of these images, I'm not sure Belizeans would understand because it's very much rooted in the urban landscape and in my experiences. And so he challenged me to write a poem for people that they would understand. And the one I wrote is one called A Mother's Day Blessing. Hold on just a second. And I think that poem is important because I sent it to a colleague of mine after I'd written it. It was a poem that I wrote specifically for Mother's Day. And I sent it to a colleague who was working in the UK, and she was working with women who were taking over abandoned buildings and setting in them and refusing to leave, and because the cost of the housing was so high. And she wrote me and said, they're having a meeting, a conference, and they want to use this poem like they get it. So here's a poem that's written in Belize with landscape and images that are Belizean that reaches across because it's about motherhood. And so they understood what the poem was about. And let's see if I can find it, and I will read it to you. So this is called a Mother's Day Blessing. Bless the mothers of Back Street, Queen Street, Main Street, and all the streets that crisscross the corners of Lemongrass Town and Toledo District. Bless the mothers soothing and cuddling their crying babies. Bless the mothers up at 5 a.m. to wash clothes and bake bread. The mothers who don't eat so their children can be full. Bless the mothers who walk the hot streets and dusty roads in the midday sun to sell tamale, bread, and tarts. Bless the mothers who keep watch from dusk to dawn without sleep when their child has fever. To you, the village women twisting straw into baskets for a few dollars so your child's life will be easier. To you, the courageous women who take the last shilling and pay school fees. To you, the learned women who speak Garifuna, Mopan, Quechua, ancestral languages that must not be forgotten. To you, the dancing women whose feet teach us rhythms of joy, happiness, and forgetfulness from life's troubles. To you, the crying women who mourn babies, youth, and husbands dead from malnutrition, disease, alcohol, drugs, and bad luck. To you, the praying women who only have God to comfort you in hard times. To you, the hopeful women who dream of a better life for your daughters. To you, women all, mothers all, in Lemongrass, in Toledo District, in Belize, Central America. To you, women and mothers everywhere, we say thank you with every breath we take, with every pleasure or pain that we feel. We say thank you for giving birth to us, for guiding us throughout the years with love and generosity. We say bless you. So that poem reached across from Belize, Central America to the UK, and it resonated. So It was a challenge. I took up the challenge, and it was a poem that after Mother's Day, it was posted in the sewing shop that Miss Ida, and she had it printed up, and it was very popular. So, um, I was very proud of that because one of the things you do want is your poetry to be able to cross all kinds of boundaries and borders. And I think that's something that I feel like Azmera poetry speaks to me because it has a rhythm and stuff that's very different from mine, but that is very captivating. And for me, sound, cadence, rhythm, even if it doesn't rhyme, is very important in terms of how it sounds. And when I used to teach creative writing, one of the things that I would talk about is that there are writers and there are people who write, and they're not the same thing. Writers are people who know that once you put that pen to paper and you put your poem or your writing out there, it's no longer yours. You don't get to decide how people interpret it. You don't get to tell them what to think. You have to let it go. And people who write are people for whom it's cathartic. It's they do it because it feeds a particular kind of need, and they can be absolutely brilliant, but they're not ready to let it go. And so people have to decide which one of those. Are you a writer or are you a person who writes? And deciding which one of those, because once you decide you're a writer, and I'm sure Don can speak to this, is that once you put it out there, you may have a particular way that you want people to understand what you wrote. And it's easier to do when you're writing essays, but not always. But with poetry, it is about imagery, it's about sound, it's about how people read. There is body reading and mind reading. So, body reading is that whatever you write, always read it out loud because the brain can actually have sentences go on forever because it doesn't have to take a breath. So, you think you've got this wonderful phrase, and it's really a very convoluted system sentence because your brain has told you it's okay. But if you try to read that out loud, it actually is problematic. Okay. So when I'm giving like a talk, I actually write my talks in stanzas. I do line breaks because it helps me to sort of um, control the impact. It helps me to sort of guide the person listening to me. It helps me put the emphasis. So even though it's a speech, it actually is written as if it were a poem in that sense. And that tends to reach people because you give them time to pause, you give them time to sort of step into the language in a way that just talking doesn't always do that. I mean, there are great people who talk, but I just find when I make it into more like a poem, it's much more effective, in that respect. And I would say if when you hear Azmera, and you'll be able to find some of her videos also online, she's on Instagram, you'll see that she has a kind of performance way of delivering her work that is very powerful and very engaging and fun in some ways, but also, makes you stop and think, because she's very expressive. And so that aspect of poetry, performance is also very, very much a part of it, in that respect. So let's see. I'll upload the video immediately so you'll have a chance to take a look at it. But I'd like to actually just have people ask me questions and see if there's anything that you've always wanted to ask a poet and never could.
Thank
Well,
you.
Irma, it's sorry.
Go
I
ahead.
we've spoken before on the phone and it's nice to see you face to face, even if it's on the
Yes.
computer. I do have a poetry book, my first book coming out soon in
Mhm.
June, and it's sonnets, Shakespearean sonnets.
Yes.
And for me, somehow I do better with structure. I like with structure and rules, it helps me be more creative. There's something about structure. Um, but sometimes I feel like the kind of poetry I do is a little bit outdated. A lot of times I've submitted sonnets to publishers and they're like, we don't do rhyming here. But with your way of writing, how do you have like a certain framework for when you approach free verse?
and the way you write? Do you have certain concepts or some type of approach when you sit down to write it?
Not necessarily. I just finished, I was in Japan and I wrote both a poem and a haiku. So when I was taking courses in creative writing, we did structures. So yes, I had to learn how to write a sonnet, had to learn how to write, haiku, tankas, uh, you know, concrete poetry where the poem looks like the thing that it's talking about. If it's a tree, it looks like a tree. I've done that and I used to teach that. But for me, it's what triggers me. And sometimes it's a sound, it could be a word, it could be something I see. And when I was talking to Azmera, I was telling her it's almost like there are two Irmas. There's Irma the poet who sees the world, and the lens that I see it through is not the same lens that the everyday Irma uses. So somewhere in the back of my head, it's like my brain is collecting and something will trigger it, whether it's like Nikki Giovanni died. She was very important to me growing, when I was writing. I actually was trained by Sonia Sanchez. I was Chinua Achebe, the Nigerian writer. He was also a poet. I was his first research assistant. So I was like in this atmosphere where we were encouraged to find our own truth and to speak. So when I approach free verse, it is the sound like I said, certain things, there's an emphasis that I want. So I know that's where the line needs to be broken. And I will go back and tinker with it, move it here and see. And I do read my poetry out loud as I'm writing it. And I actually, even though I write on a computer, I print it out. I actually like to see it because it's visual for me. And visually, I can then see, is that working? Is there something where that word, that line isn't sort of, is out of place? But I don't approach it in that I'm not disciplined in that way that I feel like I have to contain it because to me poetry is free flowing. It's supposed to have its own order. It's supposed to tell you what it wants to do, in that sense. Probably my poetry is more closely to ballads than it is to like a sonnet or something like that. It's more telling. Someone once told me Jamaican poet Andrew Sawkey, who's passed away, he had looked at my book and he said, your poems are like really short stories. Like it's telling a story, which is why I think I'm drawn to the creative nonfiction, the essay form, because I don't have to, I've tried fiction. I'm not good at it. Okay. I've got some, bad piece of a novel somewhere. And I've tried, occasionally I get a nice short story. But the essay where I'm sort of trying to engage in argument or persuade someone or get a point of view across is much more appealing to me. And sometimes the way that comes out is actually in a poem, right? So some of my op-eds ended up being poems instead of being like a full-fledged essay.
Is there a thing as narrative poetry? Like,
Oh, yeah.
okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Recently, I was reading poems from Maya Angelou's "And Still I Rise."
Mm-hmm.
What is your opinion of her poetry? And it is free verse. To
Yeah.
me, it seems like it. What is your opinion of her work?
No, I mean, I enjoyed Maya Angelou. I read Lucille Clifton. I loved Langston Hughes. I mean, I grew up once I started studying Black literature, but I also like William Carlos Williams. I love, what's his name? It's not William Carlos Williams. It's the man with the blue guitar. I actually wrote a poem that's very similar to that. When I go into art galleries, sometimes there's a painting that may inspire me. And I actually have one in here called Woman Ironing. And it's actually based on a Picasso image of that painting of the woman, it's his blue gray period, and the woman is ironing. And so it just really, really just depends on the person. And one of the things that really sort of challenged me, as Mara didn't go through a writing program, so she didn't have this. But when I was in the MFA program, there were only 3 Black students in the entire program out of about 150 to 100 people. And I was told when I was recruited, that my manuscript was ranked #1. I still have that letter. But they thought the woman who used urban language and standard English was white, and that the person who wrote in dialect was Black. So I was their surprise because at that time there were no computers, there was no Zoom. And so they asked me to call. Well, you can't tell by the way I speak what my ethnicity is. And you can't tell by my last name because there are a lot of McLaurins in North Carolina, as you know, right? I am convinced that Laurinburg, North Carolina was once McLaurin. And people will, and Lauren just means Lawrence and Mac means son of. So whether it's MC, MAC, MCC, it just means son of Lawrence, right? But I'm sure that somewhere the McLaurins and McLaurins are probably connected because there were Scottish farmers who came to North Carolina. And though my father was from Mississippi, the DNA says the roots are actually in North Carolina. So there's migration, right? And then I just heard something where people brought their slaves from Barbados to the Carolinas, right? So there's also connection to Barbados there too. But my point is that every writer has to find what suits them. And then you have to find the right journal. Okay. And I would say Poets and Writers I was there when they first started that magazine. But I would say reading through that and looking at, oftentimes they'll tell you who's publishing what to see is reading the literary journals and seeing who's publishing different forms of poetry so that you're not sending it to the wrong place. That's really important. I knew who my market was. It was about gender and it was about race, right? And so those are the magazines or the literary journals that, my stuff is in over 16 magazines and anthologies, so I don't send it out anymore. I sort of self-publish it myself. But I would say if you're trying to get it out in journals, then you really need to find out which ones speak to more traditional forms of writing, in that way, who would be amenable. Because I know there's still people who love sonnets, right? So there's an audience out there. You just have to find the right journals, outlets for it in that respect.
Yeah, mine's kind of a weird combination, Christianity and Shakespearean sonnets. So it's a weird thing. Like Christian journals don't seem to, be into the whole sonnet thing. So, but maybe I just approach the sonnet angle.
Yeah, I check and see. You may find some more of the more contemporary Christian journals or newspapers that might be interested, in it and see. It's just scouting. It is. Trying to find an outlet for poetry is like trying to find hen's teeth. And as Joe Wilson Pickett used to say, they mighty scarce. Okay. I went into administration because poetry was paying $7 a line. And at that moment, I was writing very short poems. So I knew I was not going to make a living on that. And I didn't want to teach it. So I went into something totally different, which then left me open to do my poetry without having to conform to anything. Right. And
Yeah.
so I have a nice body. I won the Gwendolyn Brooks Award in poetry, back in the day. My poetry has appeared in Essence magazine. I'm in, like I said, some of the key anthologies of Black women's writing that came out like in the 70s and 80s. I'm in it, right? So I'm fine with that. And I made a decision for Pearl's Song to publish with Lotus Press, which was a Black press at that point, and Wellesley had actually asked for my manuscript too. So I made a decision. Wellesley's still in business. Lotus is not. Those are the chances you take. Those are the risks you take. But I still feel like I have a body of work here, and so now it's just up to me to find a different outlet. And I was fortunate because I contacted Rutgers and they were like my publishers for my academic work. And they're like, we're not doing poetry. But what they did do is they sent me a huge spreadsheet of all the publishers and whether or not they're doing poetry. So I actually have this huge spreadsheet and it tells me which presses are doing poetry, which ones are doing non-creative nonfiction. So I'm going to be using that to like scout out some places as well for that.
Irma, how old were you when you wrote your very first poem?
I was 8. That
Do you
was the
rem-
little, so I don't have it here. I have it in North Carolina, but I went to a special, I guess you would call it, program for gifted students when I was like in the second grade. It was a summer program. And the teacher, we had to do things. We were studying like the ocean. Now, I live in Chicago, Illinois. I barely got to see water unless we went down to Buckingham Fountain, right? So I didn't know anything, but I had this imagination. So I did a story about a girl who goes under the water with Charlie the seahorse before there was Starkiss, okay? And he takes her underwater and she explores all these things. Well, the teacher, and I remember her name, Miss Reardon, she recognized that I like to write. So she put together a little booklet for me, covered in lavender construction paper with stickers on them of cardinals and flowers, things we did not have in the projects where I lived, right? And she handed it to me. She never asked to read it. The poetry is not very good, but my mother actually kept those. I have 2 books that she kept. But what is more interesting is that in the back of the book are a list of names. You know how you used to go to the library, for those of you who are old as mine, you went to the library, you wrote your name on the card when you took a book, and when you came back, you crossed it out. Well, my book, apparently, I used to loan it out to the kids in my class because there are a list of names and then crossed out. So early on, I knew I was a writer. And writing, I used to write on candy wrappers. You have the silver on one side and the white paper on the other. I write on napkins. I actually have a poem here that I wrote on a napkin when I went to Machu Picchu. Okay, because I didn't have a notebook with me, so I wrote it on a napkin. I've got it now in like a nice little plastic. So I would write on anything, candy wrappers, a napkin. Now what I do is I write on my phone notes. So if something hits me, if I see something, if a line comes to my head, I just put it in notes and date it, and then I can go back to it. So this has been very handy for me. I actually have, and photographs. I have like 57,000 photos on this phone because I also take I take inspirational photographs of sunsets and skies and clouds. And then I make little sayings like, one of my models is, note to self, practice daily self-care, self-love, and self-preservation. And then I'll take one of my images of a sunset or sky or the sun rising or the sun setting, and I'll put that on there and then just send it out. So it's another way for me to sort of express kind of what I'm feeling at the moment, and that's things. But I was about 8 years old when I started writing. Yeah.
I
I
love
haven't
that. I
stopped.
love that story. For me, it was middle school. Middle
Okay.
school was my first efforts at writing, and some publication in our school newspaper and some other things just made me realize this is what I really wanted to do. I
And
think a
as
lot of
Mara
writers get
says,
that, like you, I think a lot of writers get their first taste early in school, and
yes,
some
as
pursue
Mara
it
says, she
and
started about 14. She wrote something for a devotional, and she let a friend read it, and they said, "Oh, I think you should share this." And so she shared it, and then people started asking her to come and speak. And so she says it's about 14 when she started really writing and being conscious of herself as someone who wrote poetry, in that respect. Yeah.
does anyone else have any questions for Irma?
Come on, guys.
How did you and Azmera connect, Irma? How did you guys kind of come together?
So one of the things that I did was I was a program officer for the Ford Foundation in New York for 3 years. They used to have these rotating positions, and they would take tenured professors. I was at the University of Florida. And so I was hired as a program officer for education and scholarship. And there was a woman named Martha Diaz who was she was being funded by the Media Arts and Culture for her hip hop work. She founded the Hip Hop Association. She trademarked, she branded it, and she came to me and we started talking. Well, my son he mixes beats, and so I've been very a strong supporter of hip hop, particularly consciousness hip hop, where people are doing social critique. And so we connected. And so she asked if I would mentor her. And I said, as long as you don't ask me for money, then I can mentor you. So I've been mentoring her since 2006 when we met. She has put her collection of women in hip hop into my archive, but she had a Fresh Bold So Deaf meeting, and we used to meet like every other Sunday. And Azmera was someone. And so Azmera had said she wanted to write, she was writing an article about hip hop, and they were going to help her get it published, and it fell through. And so maybe a year later, it's Women's History Month, and I'm thinking, whatever happened to that woman who was doing that article on hip hop? I don't remember seeing it. So I contact her and said, whatever happened to your article? And she said, oh, I've been working on it. I said, well, send it to me. And I, at that time, I was the culture and education editor for Insight News. And I said, I have a connection with Ms. Magazine. Let's work on it. And here's the person's name and send it to her. And she got a blog out of it in Ms. Magazine. And then I said, now you take it and you send it to Insight News and ask if they want to reprint it. They just have to give first credit to Ms. And they did. So then she wrote it. She said, well, I've been wanting to write an article about being Black and Palestinian. And I was like, okay, why are you not doing it? And the same thing with her poetry. So the poetry she actually had published just before her wedding. So she was able to have the book at her wedding. And I got a chance to go there and read a poem.
Oh, that's
They
wonderful.
invited me to speak. So
I love that story. That's
yeah,
fantastic. Is
yeah.
anyone else? Anything to share? Irma, I can't thank you. Oh, I'm sorry, Hannah.
Yes, and it reminded me when you're talking about the hip hop and rap. My first teaching job was in Washington Heights in New York,
Oh, yeah.
seventh grade, and we had to do, poetry section. I'm like, oh my God, how am I going to draw on the boys? So I told them you can do rap or hip hop, but it has to be positive. You can't have any swear words or anything about sex or guns in it. And they came up with the best rap about, for that turned out to be a piece to study with for their next test. And it was
Well,
really brilliant. There were four kids got together and did it. It was incredible. And we
well,
had so
that's
much
the
fun in
thing.
the
People
class.
are now using hip hop as teaching. Martha has founded the Hip Hop Education Foundation, and they actually have created teaching guides, and people are using it. One of my students did her dissertation. She's fluent in Japanese, and she did hip hop in Japan. And it's I was actually in Korea just watching it on TV. They're still doing it. It's very popular in
Oh, that's
the
wonderful.
Asian countries now, and they're doing their own versions. Some speak English, but most of it, they've got the rhythm, the thing, and they're doing it in their own language. And it is a big thing. This thing comes on like every week and for
Oh, that's cool.
hours. And they have like a dueling battle. But,
Oh, I
I've
love it.
been, yeah.
Because
So
any way
it
you
is
can
a
draw on
great
the
teaching
boys.
tool. It's a great
Yeah.
way. My son was told by his high school teacher that writing lyrics was in fact writing. And that gave him the inspiration to work on the other stuff because she said, yeah, if that's what you do, keep a journal, and that's what he did. He kept his journal with it, and then he also mixes beats and stuff. So if you go to my poetry, I have one called During COVID. A friend asked me to do some poetry reading, so we couldn't do it in person, so I recorded. But the music that you hear, the sounds are beats that my son created. He would send them to me. He mixes and he creates beats, and so when I put them online, I often use his beats as the
Oh,
background.
wonderful.
Yeah.
That's
That's great.
fantastic. Is